Welcome to the fine print, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Caleb Teskey, and today I'm joined by Callie Chapman and Holly Oh, say it again. I'm sorry, I fucked it up already.
Heimsath.
Heimsath from Steve Hill Labs in Colchester. Thank you guys for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Sorry, I asked your name and then messed it up immediately.
No problem.
At the start of every show here, I'd like to get a 5-minute life story, which is going to be a little weird. So you have to sit there and listen to each other's life story. But if you guys wouldn't mind, I'd love to hear a little bit about your backgrounds.
Yeah, definitely.
You want to go first?
Sure.
So my name is Holly Heimsath. I was born and raised in New England. I went to school, college in Southern New Hampshire. And from there, I spent some time at Dartmouth College. I was doing research in the biochemistry department and had the opportunity to move down to North Carolina to work at Duke University. There, I was studying a lot of mother-to-child transmission of HIV, CMV, Zika virus, and in the vaccine setting. So I got to spend 6 years of doing that intense research with some wonderful doctors and scientists before having the opportunity to come back to New England. I moved back to Vermont in 2019, and there I started a bit of a different career path, moved into pharmaceuticals, and I was the manager of a quality control chemistry lab here in Vermont. There, I was doing overseeing the potency and raw material testing of pharmaceutical drugs and a lot of quality management systems. Earlier this year, I was looking for a new opportunity, had seen that Steep Hill, Vermont was going to be opening in the fall in a brand new market, a lot of exciting things happening here. So I reached out to the team, met with Callie, and it just felt right. Just clicked, had a really similar mindset, appreciated the vision, was excited about the vision. They needed somebody with a quality background, scientist background, and it worked. Here I am.
Cool. Well, let's dig it. I was hoping we could talk about the pharmaceutical stuff maybe a little bit later, but yeah. Callie?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Callie Chapman, born and raised Vermonter. My educational background is in chemical engineering. So I got my bachelor's at Clarkson University, upstate New York. Honestly became a chemical engineer because someone told me it was too hard for me to do. So I graduated from college and was kind of like, oh, what am I going to do with this degree? So I started off in semiconductors. I was at IBM. That really wasn't my jam. Had a bit of a quarter life crisis, was a bartender, yoga teacher in Lake Placid for a while. Ran out of money. Parents were not pleased, said, why don't you be a chemical engineer again? So I did. So it's actually in product development for 8 years in an FDA regulated industry. So working on topicals, so cosmetics, sunscreens, things of that nature. I did that for a while and again, got a little bored. I definitely have always struggled to combine my technical skill set with a passion and something I really care about. And then came the 2018 Farm Bill. And CBD wave, and that definitely hit the cosmetics industry. So I actually developed the cannabis product development program at my previous employer. So doing a lot of research and education basically to make CBD products correct. So a lot of us know that there's no regulation in terms of CBD. And that's really a concern in product development, both for consumer safety and just, to put a good product on the shelf. So I spent the last 3 years doing that and knew it was time to move on. I knew I wanted to be in cannabis. I finally felt like I could be technical and kind of edgy at the same time. I was excited about it. I could see how much a technical skill set can bring into this industry. And I knew I was going into cannabis, but honestly was a little heartbroken because the jobs I was finding, I was going to be doing cannabis outside of the state of Vermont, which I was not happy about. And then the opportunity came to join the founding team of Steep Hill, Vermont. It was basically perfect. It was the first time I got hit up by a startup group and it felt right. And it was something I knew I could do and I could bring my skill set and really, improve our home industry, our home cannabis industry. So now I'm co-founder, lab director, get to hire awesome people like Holly, and we're making shit happen over here, which is exciting.
And it does, you made a comment, it does seem like a lot of those jobs in certain types of like chemistry related fields are just fucking boring. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
it's just do the thing over and over again, and
Yeah,
there's
I
not a
mean,
lot of like.
we all have a personality. We all have something. I mean, it's a great job for some people. For me, semiconductors, I was 1/3000th of the overall process, so I just didn't really feel a lot of purpose in my work because it's so hard to grasp what you're contributing to this huge
You're just
process.
like a cog, sort of a cog in the wheel, really.
Right, and it's a lot of heavy chemistry, really sophisticated stuff. I was a 21-year-old engineer. That was not my jam. It's not what I was looking for. Cosmetics was definitely a much better field for me because I could see a product idea to seeing it on a shelf. But cosmetics itself didn't really get me going. Right, I didn't feel great about an industry that's built on women maybe not feeling like they're enough as is. But it's all been a great technical lead up into where we are now and what we're doing now.
And I'd like to ask you both a little bit. It sounds like through the pharmaceutical and the FDA stuff, you both have some experience sort of navigating these sort of bureaucracies. And I'd like to know from each of you sort of like what that's been like working in that environment.
I mean, it's an intense environment for sure. It needs to be, right? These are important things that people are putting on and in their bodies, so there needs to be that amount of regulation. I think that it has served us well as we enter the cannabis field because even though right now the Vermont market is not going to be held to those federal standards, we all are foreseeing and hoping that someday soon it will be. So the way that we've been approaching a lot of the actions that we're taking right now are to prepare ourselves and to prepare the lab to be ready to flip that switch and become federally compliant. When we're doing our validations, when we're doing our testing methods, we are thinking of what would the FDA think if they were to come in and look at these documents right now, and holding ourselves to a very high standard. We want to be ready when that switch hits. So I think that having the years experience working with highly regulated auditors and regulations is serving us very well right now.
So maybe making a little upfront investment preparing for the future as opposed to just investing for right now and then having to scramble and switch all that stuff over if they go federally legal.
Yep, exactly. And there's a non-monetary part to it as well, which is your company culture. So if you start off just, the way you do paperwork or the way you handle processes, if you start off on a different level than FDA standard, and that's what your employees get used to, that is a super hard habit to break when you then switch to a higher level because it's always going to be human nature that we're going to take the path of least resistance. So if all of a sudden I'm asking you to do it a much more complicated way because the FDA says so versus this is the way we've always done it, this is just how we do it. And so we wanted to start off on that foot and that path so that our employees just feel like this is how Steep Hill, Vermont does stuff.
That's a great point there, Callie. How many employees do you guys have?
We have 7 right now.
Cool. And what are they doing?
Oh,
what are their responsibilities? I really don't know what goes on in a lab.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So at the top we have our CEO, we have a CFO as well. I am the laboratory director and kind of the catch-all, be-all of the being on site. And then you want to talk about yourself, and then we'll talk about.
I am the quality manager and senior scientist. So my dual role is to help to manage our quality management system, all of our documentations, our SOPs, how we are doing things and how we are showing and proving that we're doing things. And then the senior scientist portion is helping to design our validation processes, making sure that our methods are done efficiently and well.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we got 3 more. So we also have a head analytical chemist. So he's kind of the head in the lab, analyzing that data and supporting our lab technicians. And currently we have 2 laboratory technicians. So they are the ones that are really running the tests. They're doing sample prep. They are running all the instruments, performing the tests that Julio then can analyze. And then we will be adding a sample intake position, and that person will be customer facing. So that'll be the face you see when you show up and give us samples. So they'll be cataloging samples into our system as well as branching over into some laboratory duties as well.
Cool. And I'd like to ask you sort of how you got hooked up with the Steep Hill guys, because they have labs around the country. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
How did you link up?
Yep. So Steep Hill, Vermont is owned and operated by all Vermonters, and it's invested by all Vermont business people. And it was the group of us actually started first, and we saw the need for there to be more laboratories in the state to support the rec market.
Yeah, because we only have one right now.
It was about a year ago, and it was, how can we actually, get a high quality lab up and running with a short runway? And so we started to look into programs like the Steep Hill license program, of partnering with an already existing lab in another state that is basically selling their IP. So our correlation to Steep Hill headquarters is a license. So they, in exchange for, some money, they gave us access to their IP, their LIMS system, their equipment referrals, and then also this network of other labs that we can tap into in other states.
Which you said has been incredibly helpful, huh? To sort of develop the model here.
Yeah, so we are not reinventing the wheel over here. We actually are starting off with the best foot forward and improving upon, and that's realistically, that's the only way we were able to get ourselves up and running this quickly.
Right. I mean, starting a lab from scratch must be
really
really fucking hard.
Very laborious process.
Yeah, and
there's no way it would be open in 2022.
Yeah, no, and there are some public methods that we could have utilized.
Such as what, like grants or something?
No, sorry, test methods. So not so like the Steep Hill IP, that's proprietary. But there are public methods, test methods that you can access. They're just not quite at the same level. And so if we would have taken that route, basically the first year probably would have been method improvement. And so we have bypassed that step working with Steep Hill. But yeah, so basically we shopped around different labs that offer this type of licensing. We talked to a bunch of different groups and got a lot of feedback. We pooled. A lot of us that are in the founding group have cannabis connections in other states or had used Steep Hill labs in our previous job roles. So we already had an idea of how those labs function, but we also pooled other people to say, like, do you like working with Steep Hill? Do you feel good about their methods?
Oh, so you've used their labs in some of your other jobs?
Yes. Yep, because Steep Hill labs, they can test rec cannabis as well as hemp. And so coming out of my previous role, I was doing ordering hemp testing. But yeah, so basically we narrowed it down. We felt good about Steep Hill. It was the right move for us, and really we haven't had any regrets. I mean, it's like Holly said, we wouldn't be here if we did not partner with Steep Hill.
And yeah, and that's a good transition there, because I was asking you sort of how you scouted out how to find a location. Because I'm sure that's not easy. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that if you wouldn't mind.
Location was one of my first tasks. Yeah, Vermont real estate is interesting.
That's a word for it. Yeah.
Yeah, even though there's a lot of office space available coming out of COVID, very minimal lab space available for rent. So initially we were looking at building out a lab, which again, that was not going to work with our timeline. Usually lab build out can take anywhere from, like, I don't know, quickest maybe 6 months, but more realistically like a year.
Yeah, I feel like 6 months is a real
that was a really nice timeline that I threw out there. It's not accurate. And essentially we were shopping around different things, and then the space that we are currently in actually used to be the Albany School of Pharmacy up on Water Tower Hill in Colchester. So the lab space that we took over was a teaching chemistry lab, and it was roughly 90% of the way built out for us already. Nice. We only really had to make some minor tweaks, some electrical drops, some HVAC work. But essentially this space enabled us to basically move in, how about a month of lab build out, and then really start installing our equipment.
Now, what kind of electrical and HVAC work did you have to have done there?
Well, some of the instruments just require greater power draws. So just, the 220 drops had to come in. HVAC is a little bit more complicated there. We work with an acid digestion. So making sure that we have an acid fume hood that's vented properly to protect the building, protect ourselves. Drop downs directly to certain instruments just to pull away heat. And we have an instrument that runs on plasma. So we have to pull away some of that material as well. So just a lot of safety procedures in place with the HVAC.
And you mentioned this, I believe, about having two separate hoods for different I don't remember. Yeah. What
Yeah,
was that about?
So like I just mentioned, the acid digestion fume hood has to be its own unit and separate from any other fume hoods that we are doing. If we mix the acid digestion with organic solvents, which we use in a lot of the other assays, that can cause an explosive reaction. So it's just very important that we know that, to employ that, to make sure that we're going to protect the building from experiencing that, but then just of course our people too. We don't want to put them in an unsafe situation.
Have you ever witnessed an explosive reaction in a lab?
Knock on wood, no.
No.
Good.
But
Good
you
answer.
could probably YouTube it and find some unfortunate.
Oh, I've seen some, interesting extractions in trailers with some fireballs, and there's a lot of
that way, so we're gonna just,
there's been a lot of trial and error. I want to talk about some of the other sort of stuff that you have to get in there, the safety measure. I think we were talking about like emergency, like the eye wash stations and the showers and stuff like that. I imagine you got a pretty serious sprinkler system.
Yep, all of that. Yeah, again, the lab already had that, considering it was a chemistry lab before, so that's not something we even had to install. We already had the shower and the eye wash station ready to go.
Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, essentially outside of sprinklers, like standard, laboratory procedures, you have an emergency shower and eye wash station in the main laboratory space. And our space is very open concept. So all of our tools, with the exception of a few, are housed in the same room, and that shower is, right over there. So anything happens, 20 feet maybe, you're running, you're there.
How big is your lab, like square footage wise?
Let me think. I remember the blueprint. I'm going to say the open space is roughly 2,000 square feet. And then we have a segregated sample prep room. That's about another 700. And then we have some office space off of this.
That was another great segue, because the sample prep stuff was going to be my next question. And so you're doing that in a separate room. And I'd love to hear about, you said really that's one of the most time consuming processes of this whole thing. So I'd love to hear about how you guys do that.
Absolutely.
Yep. So the sample processing, each sample type and then each test have a more or less unique preparation that they need to go through in order to be processed and actually analyzed on the instruments. So we have a number of different liquids that we would add to it and use other mechanical mechanisms. We might be chopping up flour. We might be agitating a gummy really fast on a vortex, or putting it in a sonicator to help break these pieces up. And all of that is just really important, because whatever the product is, we need to break that down into a liquid before it can be processed. And that liquid needs to be compatible with our test methods. So we have been able to utilize the steep hill methods and then expand upon them for what Vermont's needs are, what some of the more popular products are, to make sure that we can digest all of the products appropriately and get them into the right test solution. That way they can be put into the instruments. And like you said, it's not a very trivial process. Some of these steps need to sit overnight to fully break down.
Yeah, you said that. Some of them sit overnight.
Yeah, so it's a lot of time management and trying to make sure that we know what needs to be done, and puzzle piecing our days together to make the most of our time and get the most samples processed.
How much volume really can you handle? Like, how many samples can you process per day or something?
Yeah, that is a great question. One that I'm not
sorry
really
to put you on the spot there.
Yeah, it's okay.
We'll be honest. We don't totally know yet.
Yeah,
like how many can your machines handle at full capacity? Maybe that's a better question.
They're all different.
The range is for each test run 20 to 40 samples, give or take which instrument they are during any one run.
However, the complexity of sample prep is really what dictates what our capacity is going to be and how many samples we can really be pushing through the lab on a daily basis. Because I know, like, when we talk about sample prep before, like, you take this wonderful plant and you're putting it into this final product, and you put all these complexities in there. Our job is to break down all those complexities to just be able to have the cannabinoids again. So, like, our CFO made us banana bread today, right? With chocolate chips. So, like, someone brings you a chocolate chip and saying, test this, versus banana bread and saying, find the chocolate chips, right? So it's our job to break that all apart. And
you ever feel bad like you go to a nice restaurant, you get a nice plate of food, and you're like, oh, now I have to eat it.
Yeah, yeah. Think of how we feel. We're destroying everything. We appreciate all the effort everyone is putting into these products on the market, but actually, the more work you put into hiding those cannabinoids, the more work we have to take to break it apart and find them.
And so the sample prep you said takes quite a while. How long from like when you take a sample and crank it into a machine, how long does that process take till you can spit out a result and give it to a customer?
Yeah.
Well, again, it's a little bit hard to answer right now. Depending on like if we have an overnight step, so it might take a few hours to process, let it run overnight, and then hopefully that next morning, an analyst will be able to pop it into the instrument, and that instrument probably will run for about 4 to 6 hours before our test result is ready to be given. And then there is an analysis portion on the back end that has to occur, and that is actually probably going to be the second biggest time commitment that we need to give to this process, and be able to just analyze and make sure that we have only isolated the particular cannabinoid or the particular terpene that we say that we're reporting on.
How do you make sure that you've isolated just that?
Sure. So that's what we're doing right now. The process of method validation is exactly what we're going through. And that is to give confidence in our methods that when we tell you that we have found this percentage THC, that we have found this percent terpene for you, that you know that our method is solid. We're going to be essentially back calculating it to a calibration curve. But we need to make sure that the method for each of those instruments is sound and reproducible. We call it robustness, and just making sure that with minor variations that might just be experienced from day to day differences, that you're not going to get a different result. But that's a process that we're going through right now. And actually, not only do we need to be licensed, but we have to be certified. So once we get our license, we'll actually have the board come in and they will be looking at our records of these validations and certify us on each individual method. Until then, we really can't give anybody a report that's worthwhile and would mean something.
Yeah, and you mentioned that something about the ISO lab accreditation, and you said they come through and inspect, and the state requires you to have that, or requires you to have to apply.
That is actually two separate steps. Yeah, but we got to do both of them.
Yeah, that is a little bit different. So the current licensing and certification comes from the Vermont Cannabis Control Board, and then the ISO accreditation that you mentioned. Yes, that is something that we're working for, and we've applied for that. That is just a general lab standard that we as a cannabis testing lab, a pharmaceutical lab, any other lab can also apply for, and it just sets our standards of our lab practices at a very high level. So when people see that we are ISO 17025 compliant, that they know that we're holding ourselves to those universal standards.
And do those ISO folks come out and check out your lab?
They do. They come on an annual basis. And right now, like I said, we're only in the application status because we actually need to have data to show them. They can come in right now and they can see our bright and shiny lab, but we don't really have any data to show them to prove that we are being compliant to those regulations. So we're hoping that early 2023, we'll be able to invite them on site to review our data and to be given that certification.
And do you have any kind of like Department of Health inspections for like sanitary concerns? Is there anything like that?
No, we're not working in a sterile environment. So the Department of Health at this time, there's not a need for them to come in.
But part of both ISO and the board coming here is not so much, I mean, cleanliness, very important, but more the safety aspect, right? Making sure that, we don't have acids and solvents in the same hood, making sure that our staff is trained, that they know where the eye wash station is, that we have emergency procedures in place should something happen.
Has the board come there?
Not yet. They're waiting on us. So essentially, we're talking about this certification process. That's us having validations done for them to come certify. So we're gonna, once we have 3 done, I think they're gonna come out and start certifying us. They've been really collaborative and working with us. They know the need is there for testing labs. It's just, we're all running towards the same target.
The need is definitely going to be there, and so far it looks like Biodiagnostics. And I tried to get a hold of Endyne, although I don't know what's going on with them, but it seems like there might be a bit of a bottleneck here. And like, are you guys worried about that at all?
I mean,
it seems like a good problem to have for a lab, but
it isn't and isn't, right? So what I was gonna say is, what I've learned about being in a startup is it's a little bit of a waste of energy to worry, right? Where it is what it is. I think the best thing we can all do is just to be collaborative and to assess the issue together. We have a great working relationship with BIA. It's a very friendly relationship with BIA and us both on board and alive. In my opinion, that's still not enough to meet the entire demand of the
I
state.
agree with. How many labs do you think would be enough to meet the demand?
I don't totally know. I've thrown around 4-ish. It seems like people kind of agree with that, and that's kind of 4 bigger, labs. I think, we don't really know, right? None of us know. All we're going off of how many licenses people have applied for, but this is year 1. What is year 2 going to look like? Are we going to have more cannabis companies? Are we going to have less cannabis companies? I think
if it goes like the hemp market, I think less is the answer.
Well, we're not going to be the hemp market.
Well, I hope you're right about that.
We won't. There's lots of issues with the hemp market that we won't have, one of which is regulation. We have regulation. So, but yeah, I think 4, I could be wrong. It depends how big the Vermont cannabis market does or does not get.
Am I remembering this right? Isn't there a timeline on when the plant's harvested to when it has to be tested?
It needs to be tested before, as far as I understand, it needs to be tested before it changes hands from a cannabis establishment to another cannabis establishment.
Okay. I thought there was like a timeline, like within 30 days. I'd have to go check on that. Don't quote me on that.
I would also have to go check.
Okay.
I don't remember.
There's so many rules. It's just, it's been crazy to keep up with. Honestly, like as far as like starting a business in this kind of environment, it must just be crazy.
Oh, it is. Yeah, it is. That's why we don't worry. We just,
we just do.
You either cry on the floor or you laugh. Those are the only 2 options.
You cry in the walk-in cooler, Callie.
Exactly. No, it's behind our office.
You said you were a bartender. You know where to cry. One thing I really wanted to ask about was how you calibrate these machines and make sure that they're working properly, because these are I assume you're doing like HPLC, that kind of stuff. And from what I understand, these are incredibly expensive machines and are very delicate and need to be maintained very closely. So how do you deal with that?
Oh, absolutely. We have, well, first off, the instruments that we have are brand new, which is a real treat to be able to work with some of these really high-end instruments and the latest technology. So we're starting off in a really great place, but you're right, we do want to maintain them and be able to keep them at this high functioning level. So as far as maintaining calibration goes, we have our own internal calibration checks that we run with every single assay. So if something starts to deviate, if something starts to, I want to say break, but starts to go wrong within the instrument, we'll be able to tell by this calibration standard that we're running in there. That will allow us to then start troubleshooting. And that might look like going through our own checklists. It might look like calling the manufacturer and asking them to send out a representative to come and do a little bit deeper dive if necessary. But in general, we just will be keeping an eye on making sure things are running appropriately throughout every single run. On top of that, part of the ISO accreditation is to make sure that we are doing annual checks. So there actually will be a requirement for us to have an annual check on instruments like the HPLC, like you mentioned, but even things down to our pipettes and our balances, which those don't get all the glory because they're so little, but they are absolutely important. And without having a good working pipette or balance, you're not going to be able to get good results on your HPLC. So we'll have a whole procedure set up throughout the whole year, rolling checks of all of these instrumentation to make sure it's all functioning at the appropriate capacity.
And does the state provide any oversight in terms of your gear or like, I don't know, it seemed like sort of it seemed like that the labs kind of got left out of that, or maybe there were some things that were overlooked. I don't know if they're providing any sort of compliance checks. I know they're checking growers right now and manufacturers.
Yeah, so them coming and certifying us is absolutely their check in terms of us starting up. And then the fact that they are asking or requiring the labs to become ISO certified is essentially how they are checking, but through another party. So, doing an ISO accreditation is very high level and very technical. And so I think it's not that the labs got left out. It's just that the sophistication of an analytics lab is so high that
I think that's a better
utilizing ISO to essentially have that check on all of us.
I think that's a much better way to state it, really. And honestly, like, nothing against the board members, but really, unless you have a chemistry degree or something. Like these things require a sort of
Yeah,
specialized knowledge.
and absolutely that. Yeah, I don't think we can expect our board members to be fluent in analytical chemistry, cultivation, retail, manufacturing. I mean, there's just so much technology across all the licenses.
And you're kind of like the intersection of all this here. It's
For the nerds.
let me ask you this: are you guys subject to the same sort of banking rules as everyone else?
We are. Yeah, it's interesting actually because that was a lot. Being a co-founder, that was a lot what I dealt with initially, and we are subject to the same banking requirements, and also have like a weird twist for banking, insurance, whatever. That none of the applications apply to us, right? So when you go to like get a bank account as a cannabis company, you know, they make you fill out these questionnaires and like these risk assessments, and there's almost never one for testing labs. Right, like I had to, you
It's
know,
weird because it's in their fee structures.
oh no, I just mean that the application, and this isn't specific to the banks, but the applications just aren't tailored around testing labs. So they're like, you know, do you have procedures in place for? Let me think of one, like things not getting into children's hands, and like, yes, we have a procedure to destroy, but like a lot of our application was me saying like, this doesn't apply to us. This doesn't apply to us because we are never going to have a large quantity of cannabis on hand. We're getting very small samples.
Yeah, how much do you get at a time when someone brings you a sample?
It's, I mean, for full panel, I think it's going to be 6 grams, like 6 grams. Obviously, edibles, it'll be whatever the size the edible is.
What about oils and stuff?
It should be right around there. Yep. But yeah, so it was, and or just, you know, insurance, like their, you know, say security requirements and things like that. Like basically, like any insurance company or bank is, they're trying to decrease their risk. So they're trying to say or ask us all these things we have in place, but it just doesn't apply to labs. Like, you know, they're, you know, do you? I can't. I'm blanking right now on all the things that I ended up putting.
Well, you
like,
mentioned the security thing.
Does not apply.
Let me interrupt you because you mentioned the security thing, and you said you guys actually installed security even though it's not mandated.
We did, yeah. So we chose to install a security system, both for our employees' safety and just the integrity of our lab. Even though we know we're never going to have large quantities of cannabis on hand, I think the average person does not know that. And I think all cannabis targets are a little bit, right, of a security, or all cannabis companies are a little bit of a target for security issues just because someone who's maybe not educated on the industry might just know that's a cannabis company. Oh, they think we have all this glorious weed to just bust in and take. We don't. But yeah, we chose to do a security system for that aspect, as well as just being able to track samples through our lab space at all times. So should a sample ever come into question, should things go missing, should there be an issue, we're able to look back in our security system and
Well, so you got like chain of custody.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. And is that something that your insurance company appreciates? Do they like give
very
you a
much
break?
so, very much so. So yeah, that's a good example, right? So a lot of the insurance was like, you know, do you have, like, are you going to have a guard? Do you have cameras? Do you have fences? Whatever. And I had to literally be like, it's a lab inside a secure building.
So even though the state is not even though the state is not requiring that stuff, the insurance company is still asking for it.
Yes and no, because that was a part of the applications really not being tailored to a testing lab. They are asking questions that I think are more fit for cultivators or manufacturers or retailers. Yeah, a lot of times there was a box to check for every single license type but us. So I'd have to like be like, I'm not a cultivator, but I will fill out this form for you. Please call me with questions.
Do you feel left out?
A little bit, a little bit. I was like, how come nobody cares about the testing lab?
You got snubbed on the application.
Yeah.
Goddamn. I wanted to go back a little bit. I'm a little all over the place here, but I really wanted to talk about testing of stuff like edibles or even maybe I assume flour is probably a little easier, but like when you deal with edibles, you have, like you were saying, sort of this mixture of all these different ingredients, and how do you sort of tease out the things that consumers want to see or the state requires on the labeling?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can both talk about this because this actually came up yesterday as a group. We were having a nice discussion about it. Really, needing to consume the entire edible in order to get an accurate test. So if you are selling, a 10-gram chocolate, we can't just take a sliver of that, right? If we're only going to take a sliver of that, we are compounding variables in the sense that we are saying that that product coming to us is homogeneous. So if I only take a quarter of it, that's a representative quarter sample. I come from product development. We all know food science. There's no way that's homogeneous, right? You can have the best process in the world. It's just not going to be. So we need to consume that entire edible.
So like the entire dose that a consumer would eat is what you want to test for your sample.
Yes. And we need to make that homogeneous and then take a portion of that and sample it. And that's definitely, it was just the conversation that came up yesterday. It was a great discussion and learning point for the team. It was something we hadn't like totally thought about. It was in the back of our heads, but it was in our face and we were discussing it. And it's just, it's what I said with the banana bread. Like, think of banana bread with chocolate chips in it, right? If you take that end piece, does that have the same number of chocolate chips as the middle piece?
It fucking never does.
Not, right? It never does. You always want the bottom. That's where they all fall to. But right, it never does. And so it's the same idea when we're testing an edible. Like, we can't just take a section and say that is an accurate potency reading. It could be hot or it could be low. We don't, you have to take the whole thing.
And especially with edibles, because I mean, and look, I've been eating edibles for a long time, and 20 milligrams still does the trick. If you gave me 40, it's gonna get weird, and I get anxious, and I'm stuck on the couch, like, wonder if I'm gonna have a panic attack. Like, it's really a fine line between, especially with edibles, like,
Right.
for real, like, and I have such a low tolerance, like those little types of mistakes, especially for, like, I don't know, if you're giving grandma some edibles to help with her cancer, like,
for the new cannabis consumer, accurate labeling and accurate testing is absolutely essential. I mean, I don't personally advise people to join cannabis through edibles because it takes the longest to hit you and the longest to wear off. And so if you're not comfortable being high and being intoxicated, that can be a very scary experience for you.
I am comfortable being high, and I still sometimes eat too much, and I'm like, oh shit.
Right.
Oh no.
Well, exactly. And that's why, you need accurate testing, you need accurate labeling, because there's this kind of this untapped market that we're going to see join the cannabis marketplace with recreational sales of people who maybe haven't tried cannabis because it was, for them, it was illegal or taboo or whatever. And they want to join and they want to dose themselves in early. Maybe they want to start with 5 milligrams. And, if you're a brand, you want to ensure that your 5 milligram gummy is really 5 milligrams, and you want to have trust in us, and we want to be able to supply that trust of like, yes, that is 5 milligrams, it's not 10, it's not 15.
Right. And I mean, as a lab, really, like, your credibility is everything, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. That C of A is our report card, essentially, right? We're putting out results to the marketplace with our name on it. We are standing behind those results, and that's why our processes, quality, integrity, it means so much to us.
Is there any margin of error allowed in these measurements?
Very small. Very small.
How small are we talking?
We are looking for like a reproducibility between our analysts of less than 5% differences when we are checking.
Is that your standard, or is that required by the state?
It is our standard. Like we mentioned earlier, we've been setting our standards to align with our experience in the FDA. So we take a look at the FDA documents of what they require for their testing validations and adopting those acceptance criteria.
5% seems fair.
It does seem fair. There also, there's a lot that goes into that where you are plus or minus, the 5%, but then you take into account the standard deviation and all of that good stuff. So basically, from your point that you are reading on either side of there, you are confident that you are giving a reading within that range. That would be
your confidence interval. You got to get that done.
Yes, exactly.
I know some nerd words.
Proud of you.
I wanted to ask you guys about your electric bill real quick. Because I'm curious, and you said something about backup generators. I was wondering, what's it like keeping the lights on over there?
So I mean, we're not gonna give you numbers, but it's expensive, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you think about the amount of equipment required in an analytical lab and the fact that these tools, we don't go home at night and turn the tools off. They stay, they're in power save mode, but they're not off totally. So electric is definitely one of the higher utilities for an analytics lab. And talking about those backup generators, but just in the sense of like, if we had a power outage and our tools went down, it's not your laptop. You don't just press the button and it comes back up and it's like, here's where we left off, Callie. It's more like, oh man, now we need to, reset everything. We would have to make sure that everything's still in calibration. Everything's good to go. We would need to run some tests to ensure we're ready before we even put samples back in.
So if you had a power outage, oh, sorry, go ahead.
All right, I was just going to say, if there's any samples that were running during that power outage, that entire run needs to be scrapped. And
do you have to recalibrate your machines after that?
Yes. Yeah, all of that would have to go in there, possibly reprepping all of those samples. So yeah, the power and having the backup generators is critical.
That sounds like it would be a nightmare.
Yeah, not fun. Not fun.
That we have all experienced, and we try to eliminate that.
Let's see. Boy, we're getting towards the end here. That was a lot of the good stuff. I wanted to ask you, the lab inventory system or something. I wanted to get a little more details on that, sort of how you track your own products around the lab.
So part of the LIMS, the Laboratory Inventory Management System, it will be started at the time of sample submission. People will be able to submit through our LIMS portal, and it will automatically be assigned a sample ID. And when people arrive, we'll be able to put a QR code on that sample, so then we can track that QR code around the lab. Is it still in sample intake? Has it moved to sample preparation? What stage of sample preparation? Which instrument is it in? And then it also will allow us to put all of our analyzed data into the system and generate that C of A. On the final step, which I think people are really looking for, is that QR code will then be part of the C of A, so people can use that QR code on their final product to be able to link to the C of A without having to have the paper trail. It can be electronic.
And so the Steep Hill has sort of developed this internally, and you guys use that in your lab.
Yes. Right. Wow. Yeah, that was a big part of the decision to partner with Steep Hill, was their LIMS system, and the fact that we didn't have to go shop around, figure out who we wanted to get in here, figure out who was best. Yeah, that was probably outside of test methods. That was the second reason to partner with Steep Hill headquarters.
Well, I thought it was interesting because the state talked a lot about track and trace, and then it seemed like when the rubber hit the road, they were like, "Oh, we don't really know anyone that does that." Yeah. There's, there's metric.
I mean, seed to scale is that blockchain technology. That's complex. I mean, yeah, I am looking forward to when we have that, but props to the board. That's not an easy.
I know. And I certainly don't know. Like, that's another one of those things like chemistry, like setting up a, infrastructure for, to handle that kind of data. I don't even know.
Celia, bro, you're talking to an engineer. I do not know IT.
Yeah, exactly. Like I went to school with some kids like that. I might be able to call, but that's just.
I like plug in a cord, nothing turns on. I'm like, will you come help me?
Sometimes I don't even remember to plug it in, so that's where I'm at. Here's a great note I had about someone mentioned sort of science communication and talking to people about this stuff. Like you talk to me like I'm an idiot so they can understand it. And
I don't think I said it that way.
No, but that's what that's what I need. Like, and I went to science school, but even the chemistry has never made sense to me. And I think it's really, I thought it was a great point, because you can be really good at science. And I met a ton of these guys that were professors at WPI that were really good at their research. But then when you put them in a classroom in front of people, they're just a mess.
Right. Yeah, no, communication and education is huge in a technical field. And that's actually very near and dear to Steep Hill, Vermont's heart. So once we get ourselves launched and reach steady state, our next mission is actually to share our skill set and educational backgrounds with the cannabis community. So when we were putting together the team, we sought people not only that would be a good fit for the lab, but also that had experience in outside industries that can help cannabis. For example, one of our lab technicians actually coming out of cultivation. And so we see her as being a great resource when our cultivators do run into issues testing into compliance, Leah is going to be able to work with them and help them get there. Myself, I'm coming out of product development, so my wheelhouse is going to be these manufacturers, just for people who are new to putting product on the market into a consumer marketplace. I mean, I've done that for years. I've done scale up, I've done small manufacturing, large manufacturing, formulation, and I really want to help them design the product that they want and also help design testing plans that get them there. If you're shooting for a 20 milligram gummy, really you need to start from the beginning. Your flour needs to be tested. You need to retest your extract, and then you need to have good processes in place to consistently make a 20 milligram gummy. I mean, the last thing we want to see is for people to be scrapping lots or have to recall product or anything like that. So we are aiming to offer basically educational classes to the cannabis industry in our different fields. For Holly, absolutely what to expect when and if the FDA comes in, maybe how to build a good quality system, just things that we all kind of took for granted because of the jobs we have in the industries we're coming from, that we don't even realize is like valuable information. We want to be able to share that with people who are new to being in a regulated industry.
Well, like you said, having a cultivator on staff, I mean, beautiful. If you get a sample of some moldy weed or something, maybe you could have a consultant to go back and say, hey, like, maybe we could take a look at your growing process and see like if we could do some things to avoid getting to the end point where you're sending me moldy samples.
Yeah, and our other laboratory technician has extraction experience. So I see Nick being huge help there. Halil is coming out of a neuroscience laboratory and has a ton of experience with qPCR, which is the type of technology we're using to test for pathogens.
I'd love to talk to that person. That sounds interesting.
Oh yeah, we got quite the team over here.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys have very complementary skill sets that are going to really help you navigate the bureaucracy and design products that will.
I think outside of the way Holly and I view QA, I tried to not have any redundancy in us, but this was important that we aligned. I think to build a good quality system, right? It never works. So, in a company structured like us, your head of quality is always actually going to be independent of management, in the sense that Holly cannot report to me in case she's calling out something in the lab from a QA standpoint that doesn't jive. But the worst thing, in my opinion, you can do is have a lab director and a head of quality that view quality differently, because you're just always going to be butting heads.
I mean, that seems like a no-brainer. Yeah.
When I interviewed Holly and we were talking about, just our little like.
Oh, you interviewed her?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Nice. We just started like nerding out on quality, and I was just like, okay, this is going to be good. I found my person.
Does she hold your feet to the fire?
She does. Yeah, I think we do it to each other, which is nice. Yeah. So we're both, I think, a little more conservative on the quality side, and we both very openly ask each other, like, here's what I think, please check me. Like, how would you do this? How would, quality will not be an issue here.
That should be your slogan on the sign there. I wanted to ask you this because I got, wastewater. That is one thing I had slipped in there. Do you guys have any concerns with that? Because I assume you're using a lot of solvents and things. Does that affect your wastewater permits at all or anything?
We are not generating necessarily wastewater, but we are generating waste. We actually have partnered with a local company, US Ecology, who will be doing lab waste pickup for us. So we will just be collecting all of our laboratory waste in separate waste streams as appropriate. They'll come and pick it up, and then they'll dispose of it properly and safely.
I'd love to talk to those guys too. That's because getting rid of your biomass is like, I had one guy tell me he had to hire a company in New Hampshire to come get it, and they were technically breaking a federal law by like transporting it back across state lines. I was like, boy, that's
for biomass. So we are required by the regulation, any cannabis that we do not consume in testing, we do need to destroy or just make it unusable. But because we have such small quantities, it's not terrible for us. We need to mix it with coffee, compost, sawdust, basically just ensure that Caleb can't go dumpster diving, find a bag of weed, essentially. But yeah, we get
really,
off easy.
Really ruining all my fun here, guys.
Small quantities. There's no need to come to Steep Hill. We don't have the good drugs. It's not us.
I also don't have them. Don't come here. Here's the last note here. Something about it was a Rodney Dangerfield note about a lack of respect, maybe, that you guys were sort of feeling in the industry. Tell me your feelings on that.
Yeah. I just want to clarify, it's not lack of respect in the industry, it's
Sorry. No,
outside of the industry.
I mean, I think it's a whole movement that we all are trying to change, right? I mean, there's been such a stigma against cannabis for so long, and here we are making big moves in the industry and doing all of these amazing things. Yet there's a lot of other industries that are looking in at what we're doing, and maybe with a little bit of like, oh, this will burn out in a couple of years, or what they're doing isn't really worthwhile. It's not real science in our field. So it just is feeling like a little disheartening, but I also think it's also lighting a fire underneath us, because the best thing that we can do is to be successful. And the way we are
people
successful.
say that like this is not real science?
No, I mean, I'm paraphrasing.
Sure, but like
it
that's
just,
how you feel about it.
it feels like, yeah, that we're not being taken seriously as an analytical lab.
I mean, HPLC works when you test a number of different products, right?
Yeah, so that's the biggest thing for us is, they hear like, oh, you're a testing lab, and they're like, oh, and we're testing cannabis. Oh, like they either, they're trying to maybe discredit our credentials and who we are, or discredit the actual science that's happening here. And this analytics lab is going to be no different than a pharmaceutical analytics lab, a cosmetics analytics lab. We're doing the same science at the same level of sophistication. And I actually think it's way cooler than working in either of those industries, because we are part of setting the bar for this industry. I mean, it's important for cannabis to be safe. All it takes is a few people to get sick or hurt for our whole industry to go down. And that's why testing is so important. That's why being, professional is so important. That's why taking this all seriously is so important. That's part of why we chose to model ourselves off of FDA guidelines. Is we're not operating down here, we're operating up here, because we see this industry succeeding and we see federal legalization happening.
Now, let me ask you this. Is there going to be any ways, like coordination between all the labs in the state, to make sure that everybody's sort of running up here and that everyone's sort of on the same page in terms of their SOPs and their equipment calibration? How do we sort of make sure that people aren't lab shopping to give them a lab that'll give them a slightly higher THC content or something?
Yeah, I mean, that unfortunately is going to fall on the state or the governing body if we go federal to really set those standards. There's a lot, everyone acting with good faith and good intention is going to follow best practices, but legally there's really nothing to say that you
but like you said, people tend to follow the path of least resistance, so
yeah, I mean, I think that's just human nature. I mean, I think this might be idealistic because I grew up here, but I have lived elsewhere, and it very much holds true for me. Like, I think Vermonters do things right. Like we just kind of have that.
I also like to think that. I grew up here too.
Yeah, maybe it's just because I'm a Vermonter and I want to think that way, but I really do feel like the Vermont business landscape is unique. We very much prioritize quality over quantity. Like, it's just how we grew up, how we all interact with each other.
Well, it's a small state. I think that makes sense.
Right. And it's actually been interesting talking to the other Steep Hill licensees, where in other states, what are called cheater labs is a huge issue. And these are labs that come on board later, and they might take, say, the top 3 labs pricing is all up here. They're going to cut that in half. And, the good labs are going to know there's no way you're doing these tests at that pricing and staying profitable. And, what happens in other states is they're unfortunately not actually testing, and they're just sending out C of A's. And it takes the regulators and the state or whatever governing body it is to really go in and check those labs. So I'm very hopeful that's not going to happen in Vermont, which I hope is not me being too idealistic, but it just doesn't seem like the Vermont way of doing business for that to be an issue. But once we go federally, that can absolutely be an issue. And it's going to take the good labs working with the regulating body to say, please go audit them. Please go check up on them. Like, if we're not rolling in it over here, so there's no way we have this, 200% markup on testing. Like, we don't understand how they're actually putting out good results and hiring good, knowledgeable staff and keeping the lights on and having nice equipment if they're half of our pricing.
Great point there. And I wanted to rewind. I thought I was done, but that reminded me. I wanted to ask you guys about sample selection from people, because you said in other states there are some various different circumstances where maybe the state is collecting samples from people. In
Yep.
Vermont, I think people get to bring their own samples in.
Right.
And like, so there were concerns about people just selecting their hottest stuff and bringing that in, or something that's not necessarily representative of their entire batch.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess before we answer this, we'll preference this, that this is our opinions are a very conservative approach to this. And each person, each group that's going to be doing their sampling, they need to take a look at their own risk analysis and make those decisions for themselves. But for our opinions, when it comes to selecting a flower sample, say, it's not going to suffice just to look for the best looking bud and bringing that to us, because that might not be a representative sample. If you're harvesting an entire acre and selecting the one that looks the best, we can test it, we can give you that result, and it might be accurate, but is it accurate for your whole lot? If somebody takes a sample at a retailer of that same lot and has it tested again, are they going to be able to get that same result? So what we would recommend is that in order to get a more comprehensive look at your plant, it would be best to take a sample of a bud from the top, from the middle, and from the bottom, and take a look at what those results are going to be.
I saw some of them maybe doing this sort of like figure 8 pattern through the field where you get some from the outside.
Even better, if you can take samples throughout the field, absolutely, because the amount of sunshine, what is in the soil, animal condition, like whatever's going on with that, it's going to absolutely affect your plant and therefore your product.
Right.
And as a grower, why would you want to send in a sample that's going to misrepresent your product? That seems like maybe you're setting your customers up for disappointment.
Yeah, you are. You're kicking the can down the road. Like if and I'm not sure how pricing's working because that's outside of our scope, but if a dispensary is going to pay you more for a higher THC content, right, you might be incentivized to send us your best bud.
Right.
However, right, if it's a very educated consumer and they see the test result and it's 20% THC and they consume it and they're like, there's no way, and they're curious and they get it, retested, you're putting a bad name both on your brand and kind of the supply chain. And flowers definitely, the figure 8 pattern is amazing. That would be great. And this needs to also carry into manufacturing.
So you guys like that, the figure 8 stuff? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Anything that's more representative than just sending us one bud. That's one data point, right? Any of us that analyze data at all just know, one data point's one data point. One data point could be an outlier. One data point could be absolutely nailed it for representative.
I know you said some other states send state agents out. How do you feel about that approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's pros and cons to it all. So one end of the spectrum would be California. So Steep Hill, California actually has to send lab staff out to the cultivators or manufacturers, collect samples themselves under camera.
Oh, so you guys have to foot the bill for collection out there.
Yeah, so that's, yes.
Yeah,
that would not be our preference, right? As a business, I don't want to have to staff samplers. There's also a safety aspect to that.
I thought maybe the state should send.
So that's how Maryland does it. So Maryland, it's actually the state is the intermediate body. They put out a sampling plan and they send the people to go get the samples. I think that is a great happy medium. However, when we think about Vermont, its landscape, our population versus how things are spread out, is that realistic to say that our government can support that? I'm not sure.
Or would they?
Right. I think the next step for Vermont, and this would be something like that we would be interested in helping make, would be for the state to put out sampling guidelines. And then, all the cannabis companies are adhering to that. Because right now, like, some people understand the figure 8, but some people are just like, I have no idea what to do. Or financially, they don't want to do it. So if the state could give sampling plan guidelines and encourage people to follow them, that would be, I think, the next step, the right move. It's hard
a little bit of guidance might be useful.
Yeah, we try to provide as much background as possible when we advise people on sampling, because devil's advocate, right? We're a testing lab. We make our money off the testing. You're going to say, well, yeah, Callie, of course you want me to send you 3 samples because that's 3x testing for you, right? And like, that's where like me coming out of product development, that's where I can really help and say like, hey, it's worth you on your gummy run to hit beginning, middle, end to ensure you have a homogeneous run of 20,000 gummies. Like the cost of that testing versus scrapping 20,000 gummies, it's there.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
This is the conservative
And
quality.
I can understand their argument too, that like this is a racket, but it's like, yo, it's a racket right until you
it's
lose your whole
insurance,
product.
right? So
You know, like,
any big company is never, nobody likes quality. We get it. It's a sunken cost. We understand that, but it's an insurance
terrible
cost, right? Like it does feel like you're just, paying this. You might feel like your product is always going to be compliant, but it's reality. It's not whether you're cultivating or manufacturing or whatever. There's human error, there's processing error. Like it's just reality. Like that's just what happens. So test as many times as you need, is our opinion.
What about liability? How are you guys connected? Like once you put your stamp on something and give it back to someone. I mean, I was a bartender for years, so usually the way the liability goes, if someone gets too drunk on your product or something, they could sue everyone up the line, from the person who served them to the coworkers to the managers to the owners. Do you guys know what that's going to look like?
Yeah, I mean, we are liable for our analytics and our science. So that's where the ISO accreditation comes into place. That's where getting certified by the state comes into place. We are liable for doing what we say we're going to be doing at the level that we say we're going to do it at. We are not liable, for example, if you test with us and you're not compliant for heavy metals. It's not our job to tell you what to do with that biomass. That's on the state. It's just our job to, the state or whoever might say, hey, can you double check this result?
So if you tested a product that was hot for heavy metals and you sent it back and they went ahead and sold it, you're off the hook because you told them.
Well,
hopefully,
and they shouldn't be allowed to sell it with a
right, and hopefully they wouldn't. But
right, and we have no interest in being the type of lab that just sends you a failing test result and says nothing else. We will be reaching out and saying,
right, well, you don't want to.
Hey, this fails. Let us talk to you. It did something funky happen. Can we figure it? Like,
let's fix it so you can come back.
Yeah, it doesn't help us at all for people to not be successful in cannabis. We all need to be successful together.
Well, you guys need people to exist. So
exactly, yeah. So our strategy is very much, if we do encounter that, we would like to work with you to get you into compliance.
And that seems like the most fair approach, really, especially even from the sort of the state regulatory, like, let's give people a chance to fix the problem here before we
I mean, at least my opinion of the Vermont cannabis community so far is everyone has that attitude. The board has that attitude. The businesses have that attitude. Nobody's trying to cut corners and make a bunch of money and then duck. Like, we're all here to make a sustainable, healthy industry.
Word up. Compliantly defiant or something.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of our tagline, how we feel around here. So compliant to science, but defiant to society and maybe some very outdated outlooks on cannabis. That's why we are science heavy and science forward. We believe in what we're doing, and we believe in, allowing the cannabis industry to prosper and ensuring that product's safe. I know, a lot of us, we've consumed for years, and it's not that we were consuming unsafe cannabis. It's that now that we're in the public eye, one person gets sick, one person has a bad effect, like one person has a car crash, like that is all
they're just looking for someone to point a finger at.
Yeah, I mean, we know that everybody in cannabis should know there's a target on our back for the next 5, 10, however many years until it just becomes a norm, right? Until cannabis feels more like socially acceptable, like alcohol, we're gonna be under a magnifying glass. So Steep Hill, Vermont is here to put science first and make sure we are compliant, but also, flip the bird a little bit to some people that, a little too uptight about it, right?
I'd love to see that.
I intentionally didn't do it. My hands are below the camera.
You're good at business, Callie. I always leave the last word for my guests. I know you just had I should have closed right there because that was a good closer. But Holly, if you got anything else, thank you guys so much for your time. I wish you the best of luck. And if you got anything else, I always leave the last word for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think we kind of said it all, but we're just really excited to see this industry succeed. We're excited to get to partner with a lot of people and, you know, educate, share our intellect, and also absorb other people's intellect. I think the point of life is to keep learning and keep moving science forward. And the only way to move science forward is to not hoard your knowledge, right? It doesn't do us any good if I have a huge brain and get hit by a bus tomorrow, right? Whether I share it with you and then I get hit by a bus, that's not so bad.
Well, I hope you don't get hit by a bus tomorrow,
Me too,
Callie.
me too.
Thank you guys so much. I'll get this up as soon as I can. It's been a pleasure, and I wish you guys the best of luck here.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Peace.
Bye.